Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening to friends joining in from the Far East, Australia, New Zealand. I hope you're all doing well today. And thank you for joining in to the first ever Global Cyber Peace Conference by the Rotary Peace Fellowship Alumni Association. We are very thrilled to bring this programming to you. We are Zone 1, the Asia-Oceania zone, which has 3 tracks. And, we have Zone 2 and Zone 3 as well. So an entire 24 hours or actually 30 hours stretched across the world of programming from tech and peace building to drama and peace building. And today we are going to be talking about gender justice in South Asia, a topic very close to my heart. My name is Elsa Marie De Silva. I'm your host and moderator for this session. I'm also a Rotary Peace Fellow and on the interim board of the Rotary Peace Fellowship Alumni Association. So welcome everyone. I would like to ask you to put in the chat section, where you're from, because we have people joining in from different countries, who you are, whether you're a Rotary Peace Fellow, a peace enthusiast, a Rotarian, a Rotract member, or a peace builder. And I want to remind you that this is being streamed live on Facebook. It's also being recorded. And we have a menti.com word cloud that we are crowdsourcing information on what are the 3 words that you would describe for the actions that you've taken or will take to build peace around you. So we will display it at the end of the day, but the word cloud from the last session is already on Facebook. So do have a look at it. And people are still joining in. So we can take a few minutes to put in the chat who you are and where you're from and what brings you here and what's your area of interest. So great, we'll start. So once again, welcome to this session, Gender Justice in South Asia. My name is Elsa Marie De Silva. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Dot Foundation. We work on sexual violence prevention. We are based out of India. And today with us, we have a great lineup of different people from India, Pakistan, Nepal, all neighboring countries. And it's kind of tense right now in our region. So hopefully this conversation will be a little bit, shall I say, a little bit towards greater understanding and peace so that we can understand the issues. South Asia has a very high patriarchal culture, resulting in many different forms of violence and discrimination against women and girls. When it comes to violence against women, at least 1/3 of women in the world experience some form of violence in their lifetime. In South Asia, these figures are higher than in most countries. The impact of experiencing family violence as a child continues to echo through generations. Studies show that experiencing trauma and family violence as children can translate into a higher risk of intimate partner violence amongst adults when they have families of their own. And this translates to girls and women being left out of the system without proper access to education, health facilities, financial independence, and general well-being. Crises like the current COVID-19 expose the fault lines of systemic and cultural gaps and inefficiencies. Our panel will deep dive into some of these challenges, but will also discuss successful interventions in legislation, policing, security, virtual spaces, grassroots initiatives, and amongst indigenous populations. So before I begin with the panelists, I'd like to request everyone to mute yourselves so that we can hear the speaker clearly. I'm also going to set my screen onto speaker mode so that we can live stream this on Facebook. So Without further ado, I'm going to introduce my panel. So we have Rema Rajeshwari, who is an Indian police officer. She's the district chief of police in the state of Telangana. We have Natanai, who is a Supreme Court advocate and one of India's foremost cyber law expert. We have Pragyavati Rai, who works in Nepal and she's a youth leader with the UN. And we have Hira, who is the founder of a grassroots campaign called Dastak. So welcome everyone. How are you doing today? So Rema, I'm going to start with you first. You have varied experiences leading police teams in different areas. So in Naxalite areas, which are extremely violent areas, rural and urban, and you have worked with different stakeholders, tribals, women and girls, men and boys, to counter extremism, terrorism, fake news, domestic violence, and more. Can you share some of the highlights of your work with regards to gender justice?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Elsa, a very dear friend, for giving me this opportunity to speak about the various initiatives that we take to promote women's safety in the district and also in the state. Well, I was already introduced. I work as the district police chief. Currently, I am posted in a district called Mahbubnagar in the southern state of Telangana. Uh, I'd like to start by sharing an incident of domestic violence that was registered during the lockdown in the month of May. This was just a day before the World Health Organization came up with some data about domestic violence during lockdown in different parts of the world. When the WHO was talking about the sudden surge in the number of distress calls received, it was almost 60% in the first week of May. In different parts of the country, and particularly in Europe, it just went, there was a huge spike. And in Asia, at that time, we didn't have enough data. But today, when we look at the data, we can comfortably say that we had at least more than 50, I mean, the data was somewhere between 50 to 60% rise in domestic violence cases during the lockdown period. And the WHO, also the United Nations, warned the member countries that if the lockdown is continued for another 6 months, we might see a rise in the domestic violence cases, and we might see the numbers rising up to 30 million, which is really, really huge. And lockdown, we all seen, we have experienced it, and we were at the front line fighting COVID. But this was and there was lockdown to fight COVID, but unfortunately there was no lockdown to fight domestic violence and abuse and violence faced by these victims by their intimate partners. So this particular incident happened on the 8th of May in my district, uh, just a day after the WHO spoke about domestic violence during COVID lockdown for the first time. I received a call around 7 a.m. in the morning, and this call came from the northern side of India, from the state of Uttar Pradesh. A lady spoke to me in Hindi, and she was crying and sobbing, and she told me that, ma'am, I need your help. My sister stays in your jurisdiction, and she's completely locked up. She's locked up in a room by her husband, and she was badly beaten up. And she's been locked up in that room for 2 days straight, and she cannot go out because she's immobile, and she couldn't reach out to anybody in the neighborhood. Can you please help me? So I took some basic information from her, and by then I had already put in place a mobile safety team to take care of victims of domestic violence during the lockdown. So I called up my team and I told them to go to this place immediately. And the team went there and they broke open the door and they saw that this lady was lying on the floor of her apartment building. And she was completely, she was tired and she could barely speak. She hadn't had any food in the last 48 hours. And when my team, it also had female police officers, when they were trying to lift her, that's when they realized that her left leg was completely broken. That was the reason why she couldn't move out, and she was already locked up in the house by her husband. So the team, which was led by one of my inspectors, asked about the husband, where he was, and she told the team that He was working as an assistant manager in one of the local banks, a very educated man, having a comfortable, job, but this is what he was doing at home. So we immediately shifted her to the nearest hospital and she was given treatment. And I got in touch with her family in Uttar Pradesh. They were from a place called Kanpur, and we arranged a special vehicle for us. And I gave her passes, special passes, because at that point of time, interstate travel was not allowed. So I had to issue a special traveling pass for her, and we made sure that she was reunited with her family. And this was just one incident which was brought to our notice, so I could help her. Let's just take a moment to think about the number of women in different parts of the world who don't have the luxury of reaching out to emergency services for law enforcement. So the one thing that we did, which was quite effective during COVID lockdown, was to come up with this mobile safety teams. So the answer to Elsa's question, what we did during COVID to take care of this particular section of victims, was to put in place this system. And we publicized two helpline numbers, and we encouraged the community members to report to us if they saw or came across any kind of domestic violence. And within a span of 20 days, we received at least 75 calls, and in all the 75 cases, the abuse was from somebody very close to the victim, most of the time the husband. So we are still continuing with that arrangement, even though lockdown was lifted, but the mobile teams are still working, and we are using this opportunity to do something really, really productive and effective to address this issue of domestic violence.
Thank you, Rema, for giving us that overview about the situation during COVID-19. For those of you who are not from India, you may have read that we have one of the harshest lockdowns in the world, where we were not allowed for many months to step out except for essential grocery shopping, etc. And that had an adverse effect on vulnerable groups like women and girls who were trapped in an abusive position in their homes. And with my next speaker, Napinai, my organization filed a PIL, a public interest litigation, to make domestic violence services listed under essential services. So we've just done that. So, and this is the first public announcement. So thank you, Rema, for that. And I would like to now bring in Napinai. Napinai, in India, we don't have a shortage of legislations. Many countries actually do not have adequate legislation for gender-based violence. But in India, we have the various laws. However, there is an issue of awareness of the legislation and then trust in the system. So, and which is a question I'm going to come back to Rema as well, on gender sensitization of staff like police, judges, judiciary, etc. But you're a big proponent of using the remedial measures through the legislative process. Can you please share some of your work in that area with regards to gender-based violence in our country?
Thank you for having me here, Elsa. In fact, if I were to start from what is most recent, I would say that the public interest litigation that you have filed and which I'm appearing in would be the most recent initiative that I have taken. But if I go back to nearly 30 years of my practice, and I'm talking about a time when in India, the concept of gender sensitivity was at a very unfortunate low. Those were the days when we had cases and we would have cross-examinations where it was considered perfectly the norm to question the witness or question the victim's character, question the victim's integrity, etc., on the basis of making accusations about her chastity and all that. And I'm not just talking about rape cases. This would be the case even in domestic violence cases, etc. I can tell you that I've handled a lot of cases in my early days, particularly, which pertain to what is called as assisting prosecution, because the prosecution in India is conducted by the state. So I've done a lot of assisting prosecution cases, and I can tell you those were very small but very significant success stories where I was able to thwart questions like this, which are just meant to intimidate and harass a witness. Today, India has grown a lot in terms of its sensitivity. So there are already sufficient case laws that have evolved through the years from Supreme Court and High Court, which speak about what is permissible and what is impermissible, even in terms of questioning a victim or a witness. So we've come a long way in 30 plus years. But where do we land? As I shared just a few days back with you, here is an unfortunate order that comes from the Karnataka High Court. It's not a lower court we are talking about, it's at a high court, which is the apex court at the state level, right? And here we have a judge, an order in a bail that has come out questioning the character and, doubting the statement of a victim of rape because she fell asleep after the heinous act. So that shows that, this ugly head of lack of sensitivity when it comes to gender-based crimes is going to keep rearing its head up regularly, not just periodically, but regularly. And that we need to be really careful, and we have to do a lot more to combat this. Ultimately, if we need laws to be successful, as you rightly said, India, there is absolutely no doubt of good laws. There are sufficient sections intended to protect the rights of women against violence, be it domestic or otherwise, right? Or by third parties or strangers. Yet, if we have such horrific statistics where, evolved states, Maharashtra leads the fray in statistics in terms of offenses against women, and Tamil Nadu is in one of the lower categories. So I'm speaking to you presently from Maharashtra. I hail from Tamil Nadu. So I'm kind of having a link between both states over here. So when you look at statistics, it's a little horrific that from year to year, the National Crime Bureau statistics show that the offenses against women are continuously increasing. And yet we also have news reports which speak about how probably 90+% of offenses against women are not even being reported. So if we have high numbers and yet it is not even the tip of the proverbial iceberg, then we are talking about a huge trust deficit when it comes to law enforcement. So what I think we need today are not just more laws, that's just going to just keep clogging the system without real impact or effect for victims. What we need is a trust increase. The victims should start having trust in systems, and the system should earn that trust. If we are going to keep, moving with this one step forward, two steps back, that trust is never going to be built. We need certainty when it comes to enforcement. We need confidence that victims will receive justice or their remedies within reasonable time frames. It cannot be an expanded time frame, and that justice has to be palpable. It should not just be assumptions or perceptions. Today we are actually only talking, even when we speak of statistics, it's perception. What we need is palpable and real remedies being implemented.
Thank you, Napanai. And, that is a great overview because, in South Asia, especially India, we have all the legislation, but the rate of conviction and then the rate, the number of complaints is very, very low. So I want to go to Nepal now, to Pragyavati. Pragyavati, we are currently going through a crisis, which is a medical health emergency. But in Nepal, you all have gone through several different crises. Some years ago, you had the earthquake, and then you had the civil war. And women and girls are always quite the vulnerable party in such scenarios. You worked on gender issues through all this. Can you share some of the common challenges that women and girls in your country face, and how difficult or easy it was to get justice?
Thank you so much, Elsa. It's an honor to be in this panel with you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and thank you everyone for being part of this noble global peace conference. And thank you for your question, Elsa. I would like to highlight on our civil war, which was from 1996 to 2006 in Nepal, which immensely affected are marginalized women, indigenous women of Nepal. Like issues of sexual violence was a common feature of this 10-year-long violence between the security forces and the Maoist rebel. Uh, and like Napinai Madam said, it's the cases were rarely reported to the police because lack of their access to the police, because they were not because they were scared and they were vulnerable and they did not have proper access to it. And women's role as like political and social activist was quite significant during that time. But sadly, in the peace negotiation in 2005 with the Maoist, women's contribution was negligible. So it was like women combatants were sidelined during discussion of rehabilitation and integration process. During the conflict, there were women combatants who contributed a lot with the rebels. So women, and during this conflict, there were women whose husbands were forcibly disappeared in conflict, who suffered from like sexual violence and domestic violence from their family members and people from outside as well. I would like to say that there were many issues affecting women with discrimination and inequality by the government. There were not like there were not proper legal policies that were provided to women who were who were more vulnerable to these prolonged trauma, which was unjust. Because of their ambiguous status, some women, they were not married or nor officially widowed. So they were higher risk of exploitation of these women due to poverty. And also like there were many women who were like without their husbands due to migration or separation, because during the conflict many migrant laborers went to India or Arab countries for economic opportunities. And according to demographic health survey DHS, women aged 15 to 49 years of age during the conflict civil war, there was this the high proportion of women aged 15 to 49 years were employed throughout the period, which was a good factor for women. And also women who lived without their husbands, either due to migration or separation or death, they were employed, they were self-sustaining because they were the sole breadwinner of the family. So the Nepalese conflict, the Nepalese civil war had many like factors that changed changed the status of women, which brought quite like considerable progress in promoting public acknowledgement of gender inequality, discrimination, and gender-based human rights violation. So I would like to say that women and marginalized, especially marginalized indigenous women are most vulnerable in this like post earthquake, post conflict, post pandemic zone, because like we all know this shadow pandemic right now, domestic violence is on rise. So we should be working together for peace and sustainable safety of women. Thank you.
Thanks, Pragyavati. And honestly, the shadow pandemic is such a you know I think it's a term that I find very controversial, because domestic violence has always been an issue. It's just that right now during COVID-19, suddenly people have decided to make it, common, and they are forced to address it. But it's always been around, and I think it's shameful that we've had to call it a shadow pandemic, and kind of have all those newspaper reports in every country pretty much around the world talking about what they are doing for it. So Hira, the role of grassroots women cannot be underestimated. And you are from Pakistan, you are the founder of Dastak. Can you share a little bit about your work in your context in the frame of gender justice, and what was the motivation behind starting it? You might be on mute.
Yes. So good afternoon, everyone. Elsa, first of all, thank
I think you're on mute.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, Elsa, thank you very much for having me here today and allowing me to share the panel with such inspiring ladies. It's truly an honor, and congratulations for getting domestic violence services listed as essential services, because that's a huge win. And these small and little steps can definitely, lead us towards a world which is safe for women. Having said that, I represent Dastak, which is an organization working to counter gender-based violence in Pakistan. So the idea of Dastak was conceived like a few years ago. I have extensively traveled across Pakistan and worked across Pakistan, and I have worked with communities, with community stakeholders, with women and girls. So through my work experience, I found this disconnect between women and the information that is needed for them to be empowered and to stand up for their rights. So this disconnect between information and for them to realize what their actual rights are and how they can stand up for themselves is something that motivated me to start a platform that would connect them with what is needed and what is required for them to stand up for themselves, to fight for their rights, and to speak up. So taking lead from that, the situation of Pakistan when it comes to gender-based violence or violence against women is no different than India and Nepal. For instance, only day before yesterday, I was reading some statistics, and it was harrowing to find out that 5,000 women in a year are domestically abused in Pakistan by intimate partners. And this only includes the number of reported cases. We do not yet know how many cases go unreported, which is definitely huge. So the whole idea of Dastak was to combine this comprehensive information which is needed by a woman and put it on a platform where it is easily accessible. I am going to connect this with the COVID situation that we are dealing with right now. So obviously we also observed a surge in domestic violence cases in Pakistan as well. And I would like to share with you that we received a lot of complaints on our DM messages and Instagram and Facebook as well, that a lot of women were unaware of regarding different helplines and shelter homes and avenues from where they can seek help. So what we did was we used Dastak as a platform, and we combined all the comprehensive information related to government institutions, shelter homes, other helplines, and we put it in a place where it is easily accessible to everyone, which was thus far missing from the social and current tech arena of Pakistan. So this is one way where I believe that we have been able to help those who are in distress and who need the access to essential services in Pakistan.
Thanks, Hira, for that. And I just want to say that we are in solidarity with you. And if there's any way that we can help, we are happy to help. My organization has a crowdsourcing platform for reporting sexual violence anonymously. And this has really helped us understand localized patterns and trends so that we can find effective solutions. But now we are moving into the tech part of our discussion. And I hosted a panel only on tech and peace building this morning, which was amazing. And we could have gone on talking about it. But I wanted to ask Rema about, You've used tech in a very innovative way. And when we say tech, people tend to think of high tech, and even data, they tend to think of big data. But really, what you've been able to do at your level is use WhatsApp to counter fake news, but also mob violence, and bring protection to a lot of women and girls. But tech is one aspect, and it's an enabler, it's a tool. Gender sensitization of the people who are in power, whether they are police personnel or in the judiciary or even the makers of tech, are extremely critical in understanding this issue and providing solutions. So, can you share from your example, Rema, what is it that you've been able to do, some of the successes? And then I want to ask Napinai to share hers as well.
Thank you, Elsa. I mean, technology is very important, especially given the times that we live in. It is a great platform to connect with the community that we serve. One of the reasons why I took the help of technology while fighting mob violence, which was instigated by the rumors spread across different digital platforms 2 years ago, was that that was the fastest and easiest medium to connect with the people whom we were supposed to protect at that point in time. I will not get into the details of what happened around that time, fighting fake news and misinformation, which was spread with or without intentions to create violence and disrupt orders in peaceful communities. I'm going to tell you how we are using technology to address this particular issue of women's safety as part of our policing interventions. To start with, let me just share a small initiative we started in the year 2017. We call it the Gender Peace Program. This is this was an attempt to create sensitivity among the police officers, but in a different way. If you look at how gender sensitivity training programs are planned in different police organizations in India, most part of it is very traditional. You have this regular classroom session where you are taught about gender roles and how the patriarchal society in a way promotes gender based violence in the society. But the officers who are participating in these gender sensitivity training never really get an opportunity to go back and practice the same. So it's more of preaching and not so much practice. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to come up with a specially designed curriculum wherein we wanted to involve them in their daily lives as well. I wanted these police officers to initiate the change from within, and not just when we are exposed to these sensitivity trainings, which itself is a luxury for most of the officers, because not many officers get the opportunity to go and attend these sensitivity training in the in different training establishments in the country. So we came up with this concept of gender peace program, and I was listening to Hira, and she beautifully brought up this concept of what civil society can do. Civil society is something which beautifully fills in the space, the gap that exists between government and the community. So that's precisely what we did. I took the help of a civil society from Delhi, some volunteers who were really, really good with methods to connect with the community, involve the police officers, and connect the police officers and the community so that these interventions become effective, in the days to come. So we came up with this very small curriculum, and this was spread over a period of 3 months, not just 10, 15 days. And we trained these officers on the most important aspect of policing, which was moral policing. I was listening to Madam Napinai. She was talking about this, moral policing that goes on in the patriarchal structure that exists within Indian police system, wherein the moment a victim approaches a police station, especially a victim of gender-based violence, most of the police officers end up questioning her, what we call victim blaming. The first response, I'm not generalizing, but usually the first response is to question her intentions and then to give a piece of advice. Why were you out so late? What kind of clothes were you wearing? Were you in a relationship? Were you in a live-in relationship? Is this your boyfriend? Is this somebody who is close to you? These kind of very, very uncomfortable questions, putting the victim at much, putting the victim in a very, difficult position wherein she's not able to freely share the ordeal she went through. So this is one of the reasons why people don't have confidence in the police system. But things are changing. A lot many state police organizations have come up with this initiatives to create the sensitivity so that police officers don't end up questioning the intention of a victim who walks into the police station. So in the training activity that I took up in the district, this is exactly what we wanted to change. We did not get into bigger concepts. All we did was to prepare them mentally, not to question a victim when she walks into a police station. We told them, we taught them, we counseled them, and we sensitized them to be empathetic. So the entire focus was on creating, empathetic communication and a very, very positive environment in the police stations in different parts of the district, so that victims feel more comfortable, they feel at ease, and they can freely share, their trouble with the police officers. This proved to be very, very effective. And also if you observe how gender based violence is handled in India by the police, in different discussions, we see that, people talk about, how police officers should not end up counseling the victims, especially if it is a dispute between the husband and wife, which is usually the norm. We call for, specially trained counselors, and we say that, this job has to be given to a specially trained counselor who has to take care of it. But then, if you look at the current organizational setup in India, not many police organizations have that luxury of roping in, specially trained counselors. And also, a bigger part of India lives in the villages, and even if a counselor is available, most of them are not willing to come and work in, a remote parts of the country. So it's very difficult to take the help of a specially trained counselor. So most of the time we end up training our own officers who are very empathetic. We identify them by doing a behavioral examination, and we train them to take care of the counseling part. And the most important lesson that we imparted during this training session was to tell them that marital violence is not a private affair, because this was one of the major reasons why not many victims were approaching the police station. Because the moment they come to the police station, the police officers, invariably a male police officer, tells them that, what, this is just a dispute between your husband and you, and you should just be quiet, be patient, and start compromising. So this compromising leads to a much bigger violence, resulting in dowry deaths, suicides, and sometimes even murders, and really serious injuries, which is never, reported to the police officers. So this is what we did, and this was very effective, and this training activities continued even today.
Thank you, Rema, for your work. Truly, you are one of the foremost police officers in India, using a lot of innovative ways in community policing, but also to build the trust. And we spoke a lot about trust in our technology and peace building workshop. So Napinai, we just had a High Court ruling where the judge said something as silly as, after a rape, how can a woman fall asleep, or something to that effect, which was really shocking. I don't want to dwell too much on that, because clearly Rema has said, how she has gone about gender sensitization, but there is a need for it. I wanted to advance the discussion to cyber. The whole panel in the morning was about technology, and whether we like it or not, we can't escape it. We are having this conference, and there was a lot of discussion on how do we protect ourselves from Zoom bombers, etc. And they can be quite intimidating. They hunt in packs. But when we talk about cyber, online harassment, online security, do we have the laws? Do governments keep up with it? And especially when it comes to women, the physical space translates to the virtual space. There is no separation nowadays between the two. And they are vulnerable over there too, where they are attacked, they are trolled. If they are outspoken, they are seen to be in the wrong space and have to be shut up. And people actually threaten them, which I feel in a physical space, they may not actually say things like, I will rape you, or I will come to your house and I know where you live, etc., etc. So can you share a little bit about your work? And you've just recently founded Cyber Sati, which is trying to educate people on the laws, the remedial measures, and the various forms of harassment online. Because one of our other panelists mentioned that there's very low awareness on the spectrum of abuse. So can you share a little bit about what you're trying to do with Cyber Sati?
Definitely. Thank you, Elsa. I'm going to start with the last part first, which is the Cyber Sati initiative. And if you see why I started it, I'll just then move backwards on that. So the primary issue that I noticed, as Hira rightly pointed out, was that in many instances, the victims were not aware of their remedies. You'll be surprised, some of the work I did because of one Supreme Court matter where I'm appearing as amicus, and where I had proposed the use of technology to fight crime. So this is a case of Prajwala versus Union of India, where the issue that it was dealing with initially was of this horrific case of uploading of rape and gang rape videos online, actual rape and gang rapes, okay, and by the perpetrators. So the whole issue was, we were wondering how or what is the confidence with which perpetrators are uploading it. They are actually providing evidence of their own criminal acts, and yet they are doing it, and it's such a widespread crime. And this led to the possibility of lack of enforcement, which was encouraging these kind of people to do these actions. Later on, after I was appointed as amicus in this matter, the Supreme Court also included within the scope of reference the issue of uploading of child sexual abuse content online and how we can combat it. I had suggested that we should use artificial intelligence tools, what is called as active filtration as opposed to passive filtration, of trying and using multiple parameters to root this out even at the stage of uploading. Now, after a government committee was appointed, and this particular aspect was also through consensus accepted by social media platforms and search engines, we have come to a stage where they said that they will accept the proposal for initiating research with respect to this. They did not accept the aspect of implementing it. So the first part, which is to start the research on it, has been made an order of court also by the Supreme Court in October 2017. You fast forward to 2019, in the G7 summit, a charter was proposed for cybercrime or protection against it, for safe and secure online spaces. And it was very interesting to see that a similar solution to what I had proposed before the Supreme Court, what the Supreme Court accepted as a consensus proposal of part of it, has been accepted in the charter. Though the US did not sign the charter, and so it has not become a full-fledged G7 charter, some of the G7 countries and some of the non-G7 countries like India and Australia, etc., have also accepted and signed this charter. So we can look forward to a lot more in terms of usage of technology-enabled tools to combat offenses online. So this brings me back to Cyber Sati. And I realized that it is not just victims who do not know the remedies. Sometimes even the enforcement authorities may not be fully aware of how to use the provisions which are already available in law. Because there is a lot of confusion, there's opacity, particularly when law is scattered across multiple enactments. So I call it the cyber law jigsaw, in fact. So what Cyber Sati does is, one, it is meant to give courage to victims to say you have remedies. Don't let people get away with these kind of crimes because you do not know how to seek your remedies, or because you don't even know what are the remedies available to you. You know, I was at this session where shockingly a lawyer was telling the audience that there is no remedy for this offense that is colloquially called revenge porn, which is like somebody just records something and then they threaten to upload it online. So this person who's a lawyer does not know that there are remedies available against revenge porn. So these are the kind of myths that Cybersati breaks. On the other hand, it also helps law enforcement know what and how can they help victims. How can they ensure that these remedies or solutions that are available in law can be actually implemented. To sum up, one of the articles I'd written, and you have actually touched upon most of those, Elsa, in your introduction, I called it the freedom and unfreedom of women online. You know, Suler refers to it as the disinhibition theory. I called it the
Hi, did we lose Napinai or is it me?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, we did. We lost her.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll just wait for her to come. I mean, we can move on and wait for her to come back and continue later. But for a moment, I panicked thinking it was me because the internet has held up very well thus far. Anyway, so, clearly legislation is a key area, and gender sensitivity training in both the judiciary and the police is required. But I want to bring in the topic of intersectionality. So Pragyavati, you work with indigenous communities, you work on climate change as well. So it's not only, the different kinds of women, because in India, for example, we have a caste issue, we may have a religious issue, and in different parts of the world, there are other dimensions to it, but there's also intersectionality with other forms of issues where women and girls are constantly left behind. Can you share a little bit about your work from that angle?
Thank you, Elsa. Yes, indigenous women like from Nepal are very vulnerable due to increasing climate change issues that has been affecting their daily life. As you all know, like indigenous women from different places in the Himalayan region, they are dependent on natural resources. They live in the community where they depend on forests, and they depend on the cultivation of land, and they produce crops, cash crops, and other crops for their daily livelihood. So the climate change is directly affecting these vulnerable indigenous women who are dependent on these natural resources, especially in Himalayan region of Nepal, where these indigenous communities earn livelihood from livestock, forest-based produce, and agriculture or farming. So as you said, we need to be like more empathetic and be more uh, build compassion while bringing this climate change in adapting to new post-pandemic. We should be using like more of our sustainable agriculture farming by looking after climate change, global climate change in this world, so that we will also be saving the lives of different indigenous and vulnerable women and the community as a whole. So talking about my work in these indigenous communities, there's this eastern part of Nepal near Mount Everest and many of the top mountainous region of Nepal. There are this community called Sherpas who are dependent on different herbs like cardamom and different daily livestock like yak. They produce cheese and all. So they are directly affected by the climate change right now happening in this pandemic. So many of them are affected by the tourists coming there, polluting the environment. And not only that, they have been also like affected with the cross cultural values that has been connecting the whole region with different types of people coming out there with that different set of interests, which has always been conflicting in Nepal. So I would like to always talk about indigenous women who are living in these communities, who have very difficult time to look after their family, and they are the sole preserver and conserver of the indigenous mountains and the environment as a whole. So they have indirectly contributed to climate change of the world. So I believe that there should be proper policies, and there should be proper conservational procedures and policies for these vulnerable communities in Nepal and other communities and other countries as well. So yes, I've been working with indigenous communities for a long time, and we have been producing different herbal teas and different cardamoms, uh, cash crops to empower women from these vulnerable communities in Kathmandu and across Nepal, so that they are financially independent and they will be working for the conservation of the indigenous communities there living there. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And it hones in the point that, you know, when policymakers design their policies or implement decisions, they need to have a gender perspective, because if it's not their lived experience, they could be leaving a lot of people out of the discussion, out of the the progress and development of that country. So thank you for your work. Hira, you know, in South Asia, honor is often linked to gender-based violence. And honestly, it's not a woman's issue at all. It's a societal issue. So how can we help women break their silence on this issue and the larger society to break taboos around it?
Okay, so this is a very complicated question, and which has multiple perspectives to it. So first of all, we need to understand where this issue of honor emanates from. Like, it is directly connected with patriarchy and perception of men towards women, and how they link the idea of honor being associated with women. So so far, as a first step, I believe what we have been doing is we have been engaging directly with men at grassroots level to change their perception towards the idea of honor and how they perceive the concept of honor at grassroots and community level. So we have worked with men from different communities across Pakistan, including religious leaders. We have worked with men household members of the family, and we have engaged them through media, different advocacy based stuff, including videos and animation videos and games and different activities to induce behavior change among them, so that the idea of honor is disassociated with the personality of a woman, and we are able to treat women as women as humans first, rather than entities associated with honor of men. As a first step. Secondly, what we have been doing is we have been doing behavior change campaigns with women at grassroots level across Pakistan. So as I earlier mentioned as well, that there is a strong need to raise awareness regarding all of these things. I completely understand that there are loopholes in the legal system, then there is lack of education, and then there are other structural and systemic problems which lead to the problem of violence against women and gender-based violence. But as a first step, we need to engage the direct stakeholders. We need to interact with them. We need to talk to them. We need to bring them on the same page with us. For instance, somebody in the comments section just asked me a question that the work that we are doing through Dastak is sort of related to communication media. So I would like to clarify that no, we work at grassroots level with communities directly. We have been working in Balochistan, we have been working in Sindh. One of the things that we stumbled upon over there is that in the legal system, definitely there are laws where if a crime happens, so anybody can go and file an FIR against it. But the problem is that women there do not know how to report, how to file an FIR in the first place. So we need to start from the grassroots. We need to break down these issues to the basic. Then only we will be able to counter these problems that we are talking about right now. Like initially, they need to realize what avenues, what opportunities, what platforms they have available out there through which they can fight for them, speak up for their rights, and get justice. So yeah, that's it from my side.
Oh, thank you for that. It's the same case in India. You know, most laws make crime against women and girls cognizable offenses for which you have to file a first information report. But not many people know that. And when they go to the police station, the police try to make it a non-cognizable offense because it doesn't then count as a statistic. So we also have that issue. Anyway, we are really running out of time and we want to get your voices. So we are going to move into breakout rooms. So my colleague Kajal is going to initiate that, and you will get a little message on your screen saying join the breakout room. So please join it. It's named after your facilitator. They are very small groups, so it's about 10 to 12 minutes discussion and then we'll be back. So synthesize your thoughts. It's 2 questions only that you have to discuss and maximum 3 people in a room. So yeah, so Kajal, please initiate that. Hello, Mr. Ruya. How are you?